Most eggs supplied to Atlantic salmon farmers are coming from overseas because they have an egg production broodstock that's out of season spawned every month of the year. We bring in eggs every 2 months, 6 times a year, to produce Atlantic salmon at Superior Fresh. And that's a continuous production method that we rely on spawning fish out of season. U.S. farmers are really at the risk of being able to bring in eggs from overseas. So it's very important we develop a backup egg supply that's domestic, so that if a pathogen occurs in one of these facilities, that we have a backup facility. And it's critical that we have domestic production of broodstock every month of the year in the United States so that it can support our industry. It's not a simple and inexpensive challenge to produce your own eggs, because to produce your own eggs, you have to raise an Atlantic salmon to 4 years of age, or even 5 before they spawn. You have to raise multiple groups under different photo periods so that they spawn at different times, so that you have multiple spawns a year, that you have eggs year round. And estimates are that you need to be able to produce hundreds of millions of eggs, 100 million eggs, for example, to sell them to cover that cost. But a land-based farm in the United States, even a large farm, won't need more than 5 million or 10 million or 20 million eggs a year. So it's a big investment for a U.S. producer to put up their own farm to produce broodstock.
If we have new RAS facilities that are coming, to our area, having an increased ability to supply eggs to a burgeoning and really growing industry, I think will be really critical to the future development of RAS systems. So the objective I lead is trying to understand reproductive performance. And so it has a number of different, facets to it. And one is to try and understand how we can maintain all year production of Atlantic salmon so that we can supply hatcheries, et cetera. And so in order to be, more economically viable, you need to be able to produce salmon, not just seasonally, not just in November when they normally want to naturally produce, but really have eggs available all year round. And so to do that, you need to change the temperature, you need to change the lighting, you need to do all of these things to trick the salmon into believing it's a different time of year than it actually is. And so that's one, facet of that, and maintaining, reproductive performance. But the other is trying to understand, are there different endpoints and are there different things we can look at with the salmon in order to predict future reproductive performance? Because that's really helpful in so many different ways. Because salmon take 3 years really to reach reproductive maturity. And so understanding, for that female, how well those progeny will do years and years down the road is really powerful. One of the, the novel metrics that we're trying to look at. So on the fish's skin, they have cells that produce mucus. And with that mucus are a number of different things, including hormones. So you have hormones that are circulating in their blood. Well, those eventually make their way to the mucus. And so what we're doing is we're taking a swab of that mucus, and then we're analyzing it for something called metabolomics, which is basically, once the cells go through all of the processes of all of the things that they're going to do, they're a metabolite. So there's sort of these end products of all the processes that happen. And all of these metabolites, and there are millions of them, get produced and they get excreted onto the mucus. And so looking at that metabolome and combining machine learning and artificial intelligence to then say, okay, this fish was given a breeding value by the USDA. And what went into that breeding value is all kinds of things like how well her family grew and, a number of other metrics. And so then we're using machine learning to go through all of those metabolites to compare, her breeding value to maybe another fish's breeding value to another fish's breeding value. And we're coming up with formulas and models, and it basically says our formula matches the breeding value that this fish was given, and how close are you able to predict what her actual breeding value is. And so far we have a model that's about 85%, almost 90% accurate. And so we're hoping that we can build on that, and follow that through to see is this something we can reliably use in the future to say, yes, this is this fish's breeding value? And so we want to use mucus. We also want to be able to understand what is their steroid hormone profile just by taking a mucus swab. So steroids are of interest because sex steroids and things like that are key drivers of reproduction. They're key drivers of how an embryo will develop, of when an embryo will develop. So one of the key features of salmon is you're not necessarily sure when they will be ready to breed, right? Or when they will ovulate their eggs. So all of those things are driven by the reproduction system, which is driven by steroid hormones. But we also want to explore, are there other even easier metrics that we could use? I mean, so if we do something, it's called morphometrics, which is basically we just take all kinds of these little measurements, maybe of developing embryos or developing fish, or we look at behavior patterns of larval or what we call fry swimming around in the tank. Maybe they have a particular swimming pattern that is predictive of later performance. Having strains that are selected for your specific, maybe even facility, certainly for RAS facilities, I think will be really important. And so maybe fishes that can thrive in a higher density, right? Or can thrive under certain water chemistry parameters may then, be optimal for those particular systems. This is huge for broodstock development because it's these advancements that can make a huge economic impact for the industry.